recently there hasn't been like an official report, or if there has been, I haven't seen it, but there's been growing rumors that Van Lathan has been fired from TMZ or is no longer working there, whatever in whatever capacity of truth you want to go with, whether it be he's just not working there or he got fired. The main story is he's no longer with TMZ, and I want to discuss that because basically Van Lathan, if nobody knows who Van Lathan is, he's the guy that had the moment with Kanye West, and that big famous moment where Kanye was like slavery was a choice, and then there was that black dude that stood up and voiced the opinion for pretty much he was basically saying everything that everybody that was watching it wanted to say to Kanye, and he pretty much voiced his opinion, and he pretty much had his moment from there. So that was his like claim to fame. If you don't know who Van Lathan is, other than every other shit he's done in his life, Van Lathan, he has the Red Pill podcast. I fucks with that podcast. I listen to Van Lathan. But this is an issue now because Van Lathan he's no longer with TMZ and no longer uploading to his podcast because I believe that his podcast was hosted in some sort of TMZ studio with like TMZ staff and engineers and shit. And that goes into my first point of independence and building your own shit, because those are problems you don't have to have. Because yeah, he had his own brand. He has his Red Pill podcast that's not TMZ, but if it's recorded out of TMZ Studio, you have your setup there, you have everything going there, then it's like, if that job, I know he worked there for 8 or 9 years, so it's like a period of time he's worked there. There's a certain amount of job comfort that you have, and he's been able to voice his opinion on air without any type of censorship. So I feel like he was very comfortable in the job. I don't know why he was let go, fired, released, why he quit. I don't know why he's no longer there, but his podcast is no longer up, and that's my biggest gripe, because if he had done it independent, he's moved somewhere else, or he had his own studio or whatever, the podcast wouldn't be suffering, and he'd still be able to grow his brand and do his own shit independently. So, and I'm seeing it with like other podcasts too, like Brilliant Idiots not having a consistent studio to record, and they've done their show for like 5-6 years, and they have no actual setup for me. I look at that and I'm like, there's a problem. If you're going to have a podcast, especially of that type of magnitude, like Brilliant Idiots does numbers, the Red Pill does numbers. I'm not sure how much numbers it does in comparison to a larger podcast like the Brilliant Idiots or the Joe Budden podcast, but it does numbers. It has, when you have sponsors, you have to do some sort of numbers to get sponsors. Like for me, I got sponsors, but my numbers weren't substantial like that. But my sponsors were like, on a lesser, not to the same level. Hopefully we'll get there soon, but that's what you got to keep grinding. Point is, when you have a show of that magnitude, you need to build the infrastructures to maintain your show. You can't be renting space. There's too much studios, spaces being like, I get it if you're renting it and you have your own your setup and you have a consistent schedule, and like for me that's not optimal for me. That's not ideal. That's not what I would want to do. But if that's the case and that's what you have set up, and then you're still in the green every month because you're making that type of money, then whatever, do you. But for the most part, I would rather see more podcasts basically have what like a Joe Rogan has. Joe Rogan's a different level. He clearly has a lot more money than most people. He has his infrastructure. He has his own podcast studio. He has his own shit set up, so he doesn't have to deal with that shit. Even like Bobby Lee and these other comedians, they have shit in their crib. Like, regardless of what you have, you should own your studio space. And that's the reason why I started Staff Co-op Entertainment, because it's like I was tired of paying for goods and services of anything related to hip-hop or media production. So I got all my own infrastructure, and I own my own space. So whenever I need the podcast, I can just run to the podcast, do my own thing. I'm not reliant on other sources, and I feel like that's very important. Yes, I'm not at the level as most of these other guys, the other podcasts that I listen to, like that, the No Jumper. See, that's a good example. No Jumper, Adam 22. He has his podcast studio in his clothing store, so he's making his money doing his store, whatever, and then he has his podcast. So he has his own, like, the key is to build infrastructure.